All right, thanks for showing up this morning, folks, and welcome to the talk on lighting up your AJAX apps with Silverlight. I'm Stefan Shakow, and beside me I have Chung Webster. Both of us are program managers who work on the Silverlight 2 feature teams. And today we're going to go over two general topics. Chung's going to start out and walk you through all of the cool new ASP.NET controls, server controls, that are available for making it very easy to drop in Silverlight functionality onto your existing websites. And then I'll follow Chung and talk to you folks about the HTML JavaScript interoperability feature in Silverlight and spend most of the time in code demos going through how that all works. So with that said, take it away, Chung.
Thanks, Stefan. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming here again. It's great to see so many of you here on a Friday morning. We're going to be starting off by talking about the two new server-side controls we have that make it really easy for you to write Silverlight-enabled in applications. I'd just like to get a show of hands. How many of you are ASP.NET AJAX developers today? Most of you. That's great. So most of you know what I'm talking about here. So we ship these new controls in the Silverlight SDK. If you haven't used this stuff already and you want to use this stuff, you just go to silverlight.net, and there should be pointers to go and download the Silverlight Tools package for Silverlight 2. And if you install this on your machine with VS 2008, what you get is it will install the runtime for you. It's also going to install the SDK, which contains these new controls. And it also installs an add-on to VS to enable you to target writing Silverlight 2 applications. Now, in the SDK, we ship this new DLL, this server-side DLL called System Web Silverlight. This thing, like all our other ASP.NET server controls, deploys to your bin folder in your ASP.NET project. And the beauty about this is you can just go and X-copy this into your deployed server. You don't have to do anything else. It's just the same thing that we've always had here. Because they're server-side controls, we get the same design time experience we have in Visual Studio. So I can go and drag and drop, resize the control, change my background color. I can set all those sort of properties I want to do at design time. Because it's a server-side control, you know, if I have my code behind page as well, I can programmatically code against these controls as well. But what's really cool about this, and you all know this because you're ASP.NET AJAX developers already, is we provide client-side types that correspond to these controls as well. So if I can do something in design time or in code behind on the server, I can do the same in the browser using script on the client side inside the browser. So the first control we're going to talk about in depth is the media player control, and I'm sure you've seen a lot about our media features already this conference. Media is one of those key features for us with Silverlight, whether it's audio or video or high-definition video. And we think there are lots of very exciting scenarios around embedding media into your applications today. How many of you have media in your applications today, video, audio content? Okay, not many of you. So this is something I think that we can really change over the course of the next year, 2 years or so. We'll see a lot more people embedding media, hopefully, into their websites. And there are lots of different types of scenarios here. If you take someone like Amazon, Amazon for a long time have been starting to embed media into their e-commerce site. And we think e-commerce sites overall can see a lot more media coming into their websites. We've moved on from the old days where you needed, say, Real Player or Windows Media Player installed. Through technologies such as Silverlight, you can just get this stuff running in the web page without a large download to get this moving on. So it's great that you can look at albums, you can preview the music, you can see DVDs, and again, you can watch previews of those DVDs using things like the media player control. There are obviously other sites like YouTube and Soapbox and many others that have been very popular with just sort of social networking and social sort of publication. We're seeing this with blogs as well, people like Mossberg who do video reviews of electronics as well. Other interesting things might be for training as well. If you're in the training industry, you can do a lot more stuff online, whether it's an intranet or an extranet or just out on the web through using these controls. So we have a media player control. It's really easy to just drag and drop it onto your page and get video content going. We'll see that today. We'll also see how you can do a lot more with it. You can customize the look and feel of it using Blend with XAML, and I'm sure you've seen that today. We've seen that in the conference before. But we'll also look at how you can programmatically program against the media player control in the video. So I'm sure, how many of you have been to like an encoder talk session, this conference, not many of you. So for those of you that have been to an Encoder talk, I'll recap for the rest of you that haven't. Encoder is a great product that allows you to transcode the video into a right format for the web. So you can take something very big, very high quality, and get it into a smaller thing. The other really cool thing about Encoder is you can stick metadata into your video. And that can be anything you want. And we're going to see that in the demos coming up next. But what's really cool is with the AJAX media player control, you can interact against that metadata and do really cool stuff in the client side through all the events that we expose. So let's switch straight over to demos. So I have a machine here. It's running Visual Studio 2008. I've created a new ASP.NET project. Very simple page here. It's just a vanilla page. Because I've gone and installed the Silverlight SDK, I've got these extra controls here that appear in my toolbox under AJAX extensions. So let's just go into Design View first and drop a simple video onto our page. Now, first of all, I'm just going to go and grab a video. And let's just cut and paste it into this project, Silverlight or SL1WMV. I'm going to add a couple of controls to this. I'm going to add a script manager. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this as AJAX developers. This is going to enable me to expose scripts out to the client that I can interact with, that I have on the server. And let's also go and add the media player control. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, something's going on in my Solution Explorer. Now, Visual Studio is aware of this control and what it depends on. And so it's automatically adding to me a reference into my bin folder for the control. And that was the control we talked about earlier, System Web Silverlight that ships in the SDK. We also have a localized version of the control for Japanese in this release as well. So that was pretty easy, and now I've got this great design time experience here. I can go and choose a skin for the player. Well, I haven't got any in my solution today, so I can go and import one. And the great thing here is, in the SDK for Silverlight, we ship a couple of example ones. And you can go and customize these. So these ship in the SDK directory. I'm going to go and pick one of these skins, an expression style skin. And we'll edit this one later on. We can also set our video source. I can go and resize this if I want, but let's make it a fairly standard sort of VGA size, 640 by 480. And finally, let's set autoplay turned to on. So I can go and compile this project. Build succeeded. I can hit Control F5, and let's just go and run this and see this happening. Hopefully, we'll get some audio coming out here that won't be too loud. OK, so I'm just in the sort of mode of asking questions. How many of you have got an Xbox 360 Elite? Ooh, how many of you got an Xbox 360? Yeah, I don't have an Elite either. So this is a really simple way of just embedding video into your pages. So let's see what we can do with this next. I want to show you this product called Expression Encoder. And there are a couple of things I want to do here. What I want to do first is I want to show you just some of the rich features we have with Encoder and with our player control. So how can I bring in an experience where I have thumbnails for all the different sections of my videos, so I can skip to different chapters? And how can I also bring in an experience of closed captioning? You probably don't want to hear me play this video over and over and over if the volume turned up. So I'm going to go and import this video. As you can see, it's the same video that we just saw. But you'll notice this time round that I've got some additional metadata in Encoder here. I have some script commands, and they have various captions that are going to play at various points of the video. So this is going to represent my closed captioning. And we also have some additional markers at the top here that represent sort of chapter events. And I have various keyframes when these occur at, and I can also generate thumbnails for those as well. So this is just a quick 101 overview of Encoder. It allows me to take a video in, I can set some additional metadata on it, and I can go and set the output. It's going to be the same place where my web project is. Finally, just for time, let's choose a very small video output size and click on Encode. So this is going to take that video, it's going to transcode it into a smaller size, smaller resolution video, and add in this additional metadata as well. So I can go back over here to Visual Studio, Now what I want to do, whilst that video is encoding, is I want to make this aware of that additional metadata. Now the caption metadata we had works by default. I don't need to do anything for that. That's just great. I just hit Control F5, and those captions will appear. But how about those thumbnails? How do we make the media player control we have in ASP.NET AJAX aware of those thumbnails? Well, if I go through and refresh this project now, hopefully it's finished. Is it finished encoding? It looks like it's finished encoding. If I hit refresh, it looks like actually there's one little thing here. It went and put everything in a different directory by default, so I'm just going to cut and paste these files up to the root, because that's where everything I have is aware of. So as you can see, it encoded my WMV file for me, and it also chucked out some of the thumbnail files as well. So if I can go and open up one of these thumbnails, the thumbnail's got a title of a particular point in the video, and it's gone and captured the video frame and output a JPEG for me. So what I want to do is I want to make the media player control aware of these thumbnails to say, hey, I support chapter events, please. So again, I can scroll up in here, in my properties, and there's this little chapters property. And I can go here, I can make the media player control now aware of each one of these. So I can say, hey, at 0 seconds, here's a blank thumbnail. And I can go through and add the rest of those. And now what we're doing, if we go and switch back into the source, we've got our media player control. It's added this chapters element and this media chapter element as well. What I'm going to do here, just for time, is I'm going to cut and paste these in. Let's just go and double-click on these in. Let's get rid of the first one, because I already have that in here. So I now have this collection of all these thumbnails and all these different positions that these chapters occur for. So let's switch back to design mode, and let's mute the video this time, and hit Control F5. So this time our video is playing. We've got our newly encoded video, which contains our caption information by default. And I added those chapters, so we now have this little drop-down up here, and I can get a list of all the chapters in my video. I can go and navigate to each one of these. And the cool thing about all this stuff is, if I zoom in here, because it's all just XAML, the player, that's being generated by media player control, everything that we're seeing in terms of the controls and the captioning is all vector graphics, so it's all very high quality as I zoom in, even if my video in this case isn't. So that shows how easy it is for us to just sort of embed captions and embed thumbnails into your video content. So if you're encoding large amounts of content, you can use encoder and you can use the media player control to get a richer experience going there for you. So how do we take this to the next level? Let's say, I am starting an e-commerce site and I want to sell all of you an Xbox Elite. How about putting in some additional things into my video, like some advertising in there as well, as to maybe what the price is? Well, this is something that we can do using this control. It's something that's really hard to do if you're just using encoder. So encoder is a great way to put metadata into your video, but it's a very static thing. You put the stuff in there and it's just embedded into your video. How can we use the metadata in our video and the fact that we've got an AJAX player solution to dynamically do stuff in the client at runtime? So let's see how we can go and do that. First off, I'm going to add to the project a slightly modified version of that expression file. And I'm going to go into XAML here. I'll just cut and paste this in. And let's go and open this up in Blend. Which I think it already has. Have I got Blend open? I do. So I've gone and opened this file up in Blend. And as you can see here, I have for my XAML the media player skin that we have for our control. And what I've done this time is, if we drop down into our canvas, we've got some additional pricing information here. And I have a storyboard here. If I put in the word pricing, I have two storyboards here, one pricing show, one pricing hide. So these are animations I'm going to want to show at various parts of my video. So if I just show one of these and hit play, we'll see that we get this lovely bit of yellow rectangle fading in showing us the price. And the nice thing about this is, because it's all the usual XAML stuff, we can go through, we can change, the kind of gradient fill, we can change colors of this stuff if we want to, sizes, etc. We can even go, if we turn the timeline recording off, let's go and change the price. So we'll say, today only, all right, let's make it $299. This is going to really convince me to go and buy one of these. So I can go and save that XAML, and we can point our player to use this new XAML. But there's not very much difference about this at the moment. We had our old XAML, which was just a media player skin, and the XAML 2 I show you was exactly the same, but we just put some additional canvas elements in there and had a storyboard to show. So how do we get our player to interact now and show that advert whilst we're playing the video? Well, we have to come back and loop around into expression, into encoder. I'm just going to go through and import a new one that shows this off nice and easily. Again, we're going to choose the lightweight encoding, and let's just remove that this time. If you notice, in my script commands, we have our captions like we had before, but additionally, we have these new types of script commands here called animate that do pricing show and pricing hide and pricing show at the end. So at various points of my video, I'm going to want to chord into our storyboard and show the advert whilst our video is playing back. So the first thing we need to do is just go and encode this video, and that will put all that metadata and put it into our Visual Studio directory. Whilst that's happening, the last piece of the puzzle we have to do is we have to link in, we have to make sure that our player is aware of those script commands and can respond to that metadata. So in the first video I showed you, the closed captioning, I didn't have to do anything. That just appeared automatically in the video. This time I want to actually read into that metadata stream and say, if it's an animate type, go and call that pricing show or the pricing hide. So pretty easy to do that. Let's just go into our source here. There are lots and lots of different properties on this control you can work with. One of them is called on-client marker reached. So as the marker is moving whilst your video is playing, when it reaches a particular point, we want to go and call, we're going to go and do some processing. So let's just go and add this in here. And this is going to go and call some JavaScript on the client side. Let's just go and add that in. So we've got this thing called onMarkerReached. This is what we want to go and call when we reach a marker. So let's go and dive in and look at this in a little bit more detail. So onMarkerReached passes in, the send, the arguments, all usual stuff. What we can do here, using this AJAX, this client type, is we can get access to the marker object to see what kind of type it is. So we can say, hey, was it a caption type? If it's a caption type, I don't need to do anything. It just works by default. Or is it a different type that I've defined? So if it's of type animate, we're going to go and call this thing called animate and pass in that marker text. If you remember over here, the marker text was pricing show, pricing hide, the same name as our storyboard. So this is pretty easy. If I scroll up to animate, all we're going to go and do is we've got access to the player control, which we define when the page loads. We're going to go and find that element that we're passing in, E, in which case it's going to be pricing show. And if we find it, and we know it's a storyboard, we'll just call begin. So as our video is playing and hitting these markers, we'll get out that metadata from our video stream, and we can show and we can hide our advertising. So that's pretty simple. Let's just see that up and running. This time around, our video is playing, and we've got our lovely advertising animation in here telling us the price. I can see other exciting things about the product that really makes me want to trade in my old Xbox. And towards the end, our advertising is going to fade in again. It's going to tempt me even more to go and buy one of these. Are you guys not tempted for $299? If I go and talk to Steve, if he lowers the price to $299, do you think you guys will buy an Elite? Yeah? Oh, okay. I'll see what I can do. Or you have his email address. You can email him if you want to. You should suggest that. Okay, so that just shows how we can use encoder, and the player control to do more stuff dynamically. You could imagine here, instead of doing this, just encoding it into my XAML, my AJAX could actually go out and call a web service asynchronously, or early on at the beginning of when my video is playing, it could retrieve pricing information from a store, and then I could actually update that dynamically at runtime in my client. We can wire up events here. This is the same as we've always had in actually Silverlight 1.0. I could wire up a click event, so I could go and click on this and fire an event back into JavaScript and go and do something with that as well. So it's really not just what we could do with video encoder, but how it can interact with the full XAML tree using the player control. It makes it really easy for us to do that, to get extra functionality going on here. The last thing I want to show you about this control is how you can localize your applications, localize your video content. It's great that I can go into encoder and I can put in things like caption information, but what happens if I need to support multiple languages? And this could be really important for training scenarios as well, if your e-commerce scenarios targeting many, many different countries. And the great thing about this is we can use the power of ASP.NET AJAX localization with our video player control here. So I'm going to go back into encoder first, and instead of hard coding in the actual text, let's put in here some keys that we can use dynamically to figure out what we should really be saying for our captions. So I'm just going to change this to caption 1, caption 2, and so forth. Let's have a blank one for 6. And we'll go and re-encode that video. So this time round, if I play my video, it's just going to say caption 1, caption 2, caption 3. It's not very exciting. What we want to do here instead is when we reach a marker and it's of type caption, we want to do a lookup. And we actually want to go to like a dictionary and say, well, what language are we running in? If we're running in French, let's go and get the French string for caption 1, the French string for caption 2, etc. And normally this kind of stuff is sort of quite painful to do, but doing this with the ASP.NET AJAX localization, this is really easy. First of all, I need to make my page aware of what the UI culture is of my browser. So I'm going to add this new attribute, and we'll set it to auto. And what this means is, if I'm running with my browser and my preferred language is German, my page is going to pick up on that, and I can get access to this information to say, oh, I'm actually running in German. I'm not just running in the default, which is I have no idea what language I'm running in. So this makes my page culture aware. The second thing I'm going to go and do is I'm going to add some scripts. And these scripts are AJAX scripts for doing localization. So remember we had the script manager in here? We're going to go and add to this a bunch of script files we need. So I'm going to go and add these to the project first. Let's just cut and paste these in. And let's go and look at one of these. It's a simple type, Here's a caption, here's a string to show. If I go to a different language, is anyone good at German? Or how about Japanese as well? So you can even have Unicode in here as well, if you need to. So I have this AJAX type in here for doing my localization. Let's go back to our page, and we're going to make the script manager aware of these AJAX types. So I'm just going to go and add a script reference in here. And as you can see, it points to our base one, media player resources, and it happens to tell the control, or the script manager, what UI cultures I support. So if I come in and I'm running in French, this thing knows that it's got French support for those scripts, for those languages. Okay, well that's kind of easy, but we still haven't tied it into this. What happens when we change this from animate to caption? Well, let's get rid of this one, and we'll just add a slightly modified one and talk through it. So it's the same as before. If it's animate, we go and call animate. However, if it's of type caption, we're going to override the default behavior where it just writes out the caption for us. And we're going to go to the player control. We're going to go and call set caption. And this time, we use our resources that we just created to go and pass in the text, our key. So in this case, caption 1. And this will do a lookup for us, dependent on what culture we're in, and then return the right string. So if I go and run this, Now advertising is multilingual. It's still showing up in English. It's not saying caption 1, 2, and 3. So you're kind of wondering, well, is it really working? What I can go and do is I can go to my tools, and let's go and change the language we're in. Let's move it up to Japanese, because that's a kind of harder case. And let's hit refresh. And this time, you can see now, it's using that script on the server side and putting out the right resources automatically for us. And we've gone, using encoder and ASP.NET AJAX, we've gone and localized the captions we have in our application here. That's a bit hard to read, actually. So one of the last things I just want to go and do on this demo, because I just like doing this, just to show off how good the rendering is of the text. If I go to the caption area here, I can click on the caption text, scroll down. It's currently 14. Let's make that 48. Let's save. Let's rerun the project. And this time, hopefully, that's kind of a little bit easier to read. If anyone in the audience can translate, feel free to do so. But that's coming across really, really nicely, scales up really, really nicely in our applications. So this kind of gives you an idea of all the cool, powerful things you can do using the ASP.NET AJAX media player control. And you can work seamlessly with Expression Blend, with Visual Studio, and with Encoder to go and create your solutions for these scenarios. Let's switch back to the slides for a sec. So the second thing I want to show you is to talk about the Silverlight control as well. And this is a nice base level control that allows you to get Silverlight applications running in the browser. I'm sure many of you are familiar, if you've used Silverlight before, with Silverlight.js, which is a JavaScript file that's responsible for starting up the runtime, embedding it in the browser, and running your XAML or your Zap application. Well, this kind of makes it a lot easier. You don't have to worry about that. If you're an AJAX developer and you're working with someone who's creating a Silverlight application, this allows you to just drag and drop that application and resize it to the right dimensions in your web page. You don't have to worry about Silverlight.js. You don't have to worry about object tags, embed tags, various parameters, etc. The great thing about this control is the media player control actually inherits and uses this as well. It's a nice bit of base functionality. And what I wanted to show you is how easy it is to embed this into your applications. If we go back over to laptop 2, I'm going to go and include a different page here in my project, default 2. As you can see, it's already got the Silverlight control here in my project. That's just this control. I've just dragged and dropped it in. That's all it is. And I can go into design. And, again, I get a design time experience. I can resize the control. It's currently set to 100% height and width. Now, how do I add a Silverlight application to this control? The easiest way to go and do this is you can add a Silverlight link to an ASP.NET project. And what this does is it will go through and it will look at all the projects in your solution and say, hey, are any of you Silverlight projects? And in this case, I've got one. I've written an application that's going to allow me to directly upload photographs to Flickr. I can add a test page that references the control, but hey, that's the page I'm writing now. And I can enable Silverlight debugging. And the great thing about this is I can hit F5, I can debug through my ASP.NET code, and seamlessly debug through into my Silverlight project, backwards and forth as well. So let's go and click on Add. And it's gone and added this client bin directory for me. And in there, it's already gone and put the ZAP, the package file for my Silverlight 2 application. So I can go to my control. I can go and set the source now for my Silverlight control to be the ZAP that was packaged up here. Notice it also allowed me to set the source to be a XAML file if I want, but I can set it to a Silverlight 2 ZAP too. So I can just go and hit compile. That succeeded. And this time, we've shown you everything so far running on Windows, but let's actually see this running on a Mac as well. So I've just compiled that application, and I can go to that default 2 page we just created. We can load that up. So this is a Silverlight This is a Silverlight application running on ASP.NET. And all I've had to do is drag and drop that control and point it at my Zap. So I haven't had to worry about anything else. So you can see here that I have a Flickr uploader application. I've got various different photos on here. And what I want to do is go and connect to Flickr and upload these photos. So first of all, let's go and create a new tab. And let's log into my Flickr account here. I can see I've got all my photos online here that I uploaded yesterday, so I should probably have some of these deleted. Let's just delete a couple of these quickly, and then we'll re-upload them. So we haven't got the desert and the awesome creek. We've got the rest of them here. So if we now go back to our Flickr uploader application, I can go and authorize for Flickr. And this is doing a nice, cross-domain call, working against Flickr's APIs directly. I don't have to go through a relay server, and I've authorized this application now to go and connect to Flickr. So I can go and connect to Flickr. I can establish my FROB and my various signing tokens that you need to use Flickr. And then finally, I can go and click on Upload Pictures. And so it's going to upload all these photos with today's date timestamp. That's how we'll check if it's really uploading. And you can see it's uploading each photo, and it's returning an ID as it gets each photograph uploaded. So this is just a nice sample of just showing you how easy it is to embed a Silverlight application into your ASP.NET site. If we go through here and hit refresh now, we should start seeing these photos being uploaded today, so March the 7th. So our photos are now being uploaded directly into Flickr. And that's continuing. OK, so that just shows how easy it is for us to use the Silverlight control and to embed a Silverlight control into your application. Again, just like the media player control we saw, this exposes a bunch of properties and events to us. So I can go and set properties like the background color, the height and width. I can do that at design time again. I can do that at runtime again using script. It emits the same AJAX types we just saw in the media player control. And there are also other initialization factors, initialization events that I can receive. For example, what happens if there's an issue loading up my Zap, or there's some bug in my application that's going to cause the Silverlight runtime to have an issue? I can actually capture that event in Silverlight in JavaScript using this control and emit out maybe a different bit of HTML to say that there's been an issue. Sorry, this application's unavailable at this time. We can do all that kind of cool stuff using this control as well. So on that note, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to focus more on Stefan.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, so you've seen sort of how to interact with Silverlight using the built-in ASP.NET AJAX controls. What I'll talk to you now for a few minutes about is what's built into Silverlight 2 itself for being able to go out and manipulate HTML, manipulate the DOM, and work with JavaScript. So there are basically two critical things that we enable today in Silverlight 2. We allow managed code to reach out into the DOM, grab DOM references, JavaScript objects, you name it, and go manipulate them. And then we also enable communication in the reverse direction. And so you can sit there and write a bunch of JavaScript code and actually have that call into entry points inside of your managed code. I'm going to walk through a number of code samples with you today that highlight some of the cool things that you can do with that functionality. So if we start out with the first direction, manage code calling out into JavaScript, what I've got up here on the slide is basically a very simple summary of what is in the HTML namespace, the HTML bridge feature that we have in Silverlight 2 today. If you were actually here for MIX last year, you probably saw a slightly different version of this slide. There haven't been any major changes in terms of the types. Basically, we can give you a managed representation of a document. We can give you a managed representation of a window. And then you can reach out and get a hold of elements, which come back as HTML element instances. And then the other thing is everything else that's not a document, a window, or an element ultimately is either some kind of HTML object or it's this base type script object. And there's actually a fair amount of magic that's bound up into the script object. So with that said, what we'll do is jump back into the code and start walking you through some different ways of making use of the HTML bridge in Silverlight 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is walk you through just a simple example of managed code calling out to HTML and then vice versa, JavaScript calling back into managed code. What I have here is a very simple HTML page in ASP.NET. Much like Chung was showing you earlier, I've already sort of hooked everything up so that the ASP Silverlight control will pick up the code that I'm going to write in Silverlight 2. And what I want to accomplish here are two simple things. I want to be able to have an HTML button actually fire an event that gets caught and trapped inside of managed code. So I want managed code event handlers to be hooked up to an HTML element. And then in the other direction, I want a piece of JavaScript to be able to call back into my managed code. So let's take a look at the first example with the button that's going to go out and hook itself up in managed code. I've got a very simple example of subscribing to an event on an HTML element. So I do two things. First, I have to get things set up. So you'll notice here I have this type HTML page. That is the central type of the HTML bridge in Silverlight 2. Anytime you're in managed code and you're thinking to yourself, I need to do something with JavaScript or HTML, the first thing you need to do is type in HTML page, and then from there you can get to the document object, you can get to the window object, and then you can also do quite a few powerful things involving our scriptable feature. So for purposes of this example, though, I just need to get to the document. And again, we have a very minimalist API, but it basically follows exactly what you've seen in JavaScript. Just like you can go get an element by ID off of the document in JavaScript, you can do the exact same thing in managed code. And so once I've got my reference, you'll see that in this case, because it's an actual HTML object, I can hook up an event handler. And so all you do to hook up an event handler is you tell us what's the name of the event you want to hook, and then you need to give us some piece of managed code that's actually going to be called when the HTML element raises that event. And a quick little note here, you know that typically event names, they're slightly different between IE and Firefox. So IE likes to put the word on before the event names, and Firefox doesn't. This is one of the places where we basically paper that over for you. So we're smart enough to say, okay, if you ask for the on-click event, but you're actually running in Firefox, we'll automatically say, oh, well, you probably meant click, not on-click, and we'll just sort of silently drop the on text from the event. And then vice versa, if you wanted to subscribe to the click event and you were running an IE, we'd be like, oh, okay, well, you probably meant on-click, and we'll just do that for you automatically. So you don't have to sit there and if-def your code all over the place for different browser platforms. So in this case, great, I'm going to go fire an event into a managed method right here, HTML button clicked. There are a couple of things I can do. I can actually take the sender parameter that comes in and I can actually cast that back to the HTML element that triggered the event. And all I'm doing here is I'm reaching out to the button and I'm manipulating some text. I'm just setting an attribute, and then I'm also setting another attribute on a text area. So again, it's not a comprehensive example of everything you can do with an HTML element from inside of managed code, but basically you can set and get attributes, you can set and get style attributes, and you can set and get complex property values. And then also the big thing that we included this time around in Silverlight 2 that you didn't have available last year, and you'll see it in a little bit, is you can also invoke arbitrary methods on HTML elements and on JavaScript objects. So any kind of method that's exposed by the browsers today, as long as you get a reference to the HTML element, you can happily invoke methods on it. Now there's another coding technique that I just wanted to show you, which is all of this so far right now, I'm just saying, hey, look, there's a document, and I get an element, and everything's just sort of working. But usually, right out on the internet, it takes a long time to download pages if you're running on a 56K modem. You might have very big pages with lots of HTML on it. So even if you're on an internet connection or a DSL or cable modem connection, the full HTML DOM may not actually have been parsed by the browser by the point in time your managed code in Silverlight 2 actually wants to reach out and get a hold of an object. If you played around a bit, you'll know you ran into that problem if you try to do like document get element by ID and nothing comes back. And you'll be like, well, what the heck? I have an HTML page. I know I have a div called foo. Where is it? Well, that's because, right, on a large page, I've got the Silverlight application. Maybe it's at the top of the DOM tree, and my div element is all the way at the bottom. And oh, guess what? The Silverlight application started up and initialized itself before the browser ever got to the bottom of the page. So you've got this weird timing issue. And so what we did is, rather than sort of leaving it as an exercise to the developer, we've actually baked in a coding pattern so that you can always deterministically know when can I safely get to an HTML DOM element. When do I know that the page has fully parsed itself? So you'll see here, this is the startup event that's fired by all Silverlight 2 managed applications. And you'll see that inside of it, I've got a bit of defensive coding. I've said, hey, on the document, go check and let me know, is it ready? Has it been fully parsed? So if that property comes back as true, great. I can go out and start manipulating DOM elements because they'll actually be there. I know I can find them. On the other hand, if it isn't, we expose this event called document ready. And what's nice about that is you just give us an event handler, like I did over here, and we will subsequently call back to your code when we realize that the whole HTML DOM has actually been loaded. And so as long as you write your code defensively like this, and then you basically, in your document ready event handler, you pipe everything down to a common utility method like I did here to do the setup, you've got a guaranteed way of knowing that regardless of whether or not you're on a fast connection or a slow connection, a big page, a little page, no matter what, as long as you follow this coding pattern, you've got a safe way to be able to reach out and get to HTML elements either when your application starts up or shortly thereafter. Okay, so that's showing you the managed code calling out to JavaScript story. Let's take the reverse, which is, remember, I also wanted this button. I wanted to be able to click on it and call back into the Silverlight 2 managed app. And so there are a couple of things I've done. First off, in my Silverlight control definition here, the ASP.NET developers, they exposed this event. It's a client-side event called onPluginLoaded. And as you would expect, that's going to fire client-side and call whatever JavaScript method you give it. And basically, when that method is called, you know that the Silverlight control has started up, and all of the managed code inside of application startup and the root visual with the XAML, all that stuff has already been run and hooked up. And that's important because, again, you've got a timing issue here, because in this case, I'm talking about the scriptable feature. And basically, scriptable means JavaScript can call into a method that's been marked for access from script. And you can't safely do that unless the Silverlight application is actually instantiated and running. So now you've got the flip side of the problem, right? What happens if you have a big page, you got the JavaScript at the top of the page trying to do something with the Silverlight control, and oops, the Silverlight control is all the way at the bottom of the page. Well, you can't, how do you know when you can safely call into it? So this is step one. You go ahead and you hook the loaded event. And by the way, in this case, I'm showing it to you from the point of view of the ASP.NET AJAX control. Remember, this control wraps that create Silverlight JS function that ships, and that's available for non-ASP.NET platforms. So if you're running on Apache or you're just running off the file system, you can do the same thing. It's just the event is called onLoaded as opposed to onPluginLoaded. But the exact same coding approach is available. So in this case, I've got my plugin loaded method. Because this is an ASP.NET AJAX control, the sender is actually the AJAX control, so I have to drill down into it and say, hey, actually, I want the reference to the object tag underneath the hood. So that's why I drill down, I say, get me the underlying element. And then from there, I have this sort of funky-looking code. I've got my object tag, my control reference. I'm drilling into the content property, right? That's been available since Silverlight 1, and basically you can get to the native XAML tree that's available off of there. That's also where we expose all of the scriptable entry points. And then there's this sort of strange-looking thing, my registered entry point. Well, what the heck's that? Well, when I flip back to the managed code, you'll see that basically with the scriptable feature, not only do you expose classes, properties, methods, events, you name it, for access to JavaScript developers, you also, as a developer, decide, well, what's sort of my string moniker by which I can reference it? And so in my case, I just said, I'm going to call my scriptable entry point my registered entry point. The other thing to note about this is you're not limited to one scriptable entry point. You want to go create 50 scriptable entry points pointing at 50 different scriptable types? Great, go for it. There's no effective limitation on how many of these you hook up. So at this point, I've basically cached in JavaScript my scriptable entry point, and now when I actually want to make use of it, this is sort of the second part of the defensive coding, I basically wrap everything in these if checks, and I say, hey, make sure I actually managed to get my control reference. And this is how this is my flag that tells me, oh yeah, the plugin's loaded. And if it is loaded, you can see I take my scriptable entry point, and I'm actually calling a managed method, in this case, simple method example, and again, I'm just passing in a string. On the other hand, if it turns out that the Silverlight control hasn't completely initialized, I do something else. Now, again, in real life, of course, you're not going to go out and pop a big ugly alert box, but for your customers, maybe you call Windows set timeout and you go to sleep for 200 milliseconds and then you reattempt the scriptable call because maybe that's enough time for the Silverlight app to have been downloaded over the 56K modem and it's actually started up. And then if we flip back to the managed side of the house and we take a look at our scriptable entry point, so there should be a simple method call in here. So right now, again, a very simple example. You can actually use much richer types, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you'll see what I've done here. I've attributed the method with this scriptable member attribute. And that's how we know when we reflect against a type at runtime, that's how we know, oh, that's a method that you, the developer, actually said it's okay to call it from JavaScript. And so there are two ways that you can do this today in Silverlight 2. You can individually mark properties, methods, and events and say, well, this one and this one, but not that one, are available to JavaScript. Or alternatively, there's a scriptable type attribute that you can just stuff right up on your class. If you know that all of the public properties, methods, and events, you just automatically want to make them available. So you've got both class level and method level attributes. And the last piece of this puzzle is you need to tell us that we should go out and actually make that simple method example available, and that's this line of code down here. So that's what I was showing earlier. On the HTML page type, you'll see there's a register scriptable object method, and what you do is you tell us, by the way, what do you want the string moniker to be in JavaScript? So, whatever, foo, bar, baz, you name it. You just put in whatever makes sense to you here, and that's going to show up off of the content property in JavaScript. And then you also give us the live managed object instance that's going to be sitting in memory, so that when JavaScript says, I want to call method foo, we're like, okay, we need to route the call to that managed object. And again, I'm not going to show it here today, but you can actually do other funky things, like you can go ahead and register scriptable objects, and then you can turn around and you can unregister them at a later point in time. So we actually had folks saying that I want to sort of build a scriptable entry point, have it running for a point in time, then actually revoke all of it and pull it back so it's not available maybe after the page is running. So you can do a lot of interesting tricks with this feature. So okay, now that we've sort of seen all of that there, let's go out and build it. And we'll come in here. I'm just going to quickly flip us over to Firefox. So we'll use Firefox as the default for right now. Go out, pull it up on the laptop. And so for this example, again, remember, very simple. We just have a text area, 2 buttons. So when I click to print some browser information, that's managed code going out, automatically changing the text that's on the button. It went out and grabbed the user agent, and then it actually stuffed that into the text area. And then vice versa, calling into a scriptable method. So this is JavaScript successfully called into the managed code of the Silverlight app, right? And we appended some extra goop into it, and then popped the alert box. Okay, so that's sort of the quick and dirty on what does it mean to go from managed code to HTML? What does it mean to go from JavaScript back into managed code? Now let's show something that uses a little bit more complex types. And so in this case, I've got a page that makes use of the scriptable feature to A, go out and take a complex JavaScript object graph and get it pushed into managed code, and then B, since I'm running the Silverlight code in the browser, I turn around and I stuff that object graph down into isolated storage. So let's first take a look at the JavaScript code itself. I've got an array, and then I just went out and I created a couple of instances of some object. I'm calling it a car with a couple of different properties. So I've got a JavaScript array of JavaScript objects, something that probably all of us have to deal with every day. And then what I do is I go to my instance of the Silverlight application, and I call this scriptable method called storeCars. So I want to pass an array of JavaScript objects into managed code. And the way you do this, if you take a look at it, is the magic of this method, create managed object. So what create managed object is, it's a special method that we automatically inject onto every scriptable entry point. So every time you call register scriptable object, and now there's the foo entry point available in JavaScript, we automagically also stuff onto that foo entry point. We say, oh yeah, we'll give you this create managed object helper. And as you can probably guess, its purpose is to marshal the JavaScript data by value into a corresponding managed object graph. So what I'm doing right here is I'm saying, given the array of JavaScript objects using JSON serialization and deserialization, please marshal it into a separate managed object graph, which is a generic list containing instances of a managed type called car. And I have the car type defined inside of my Silverlight project. So like I said, it's a critical point. That's one of two ways to get JavaScript data, just standalone JavaScript data, into the managed world. One of them is marshaling by value. And this is how we do the marshal by value trick. The thing that's actually pretty cool is that the return value from create managed object, it actually turns out to be a JavaScript proxy that we, inside of Silverlight, sort of automagically gin up for you. And it's a JavaScript proxy that wraps a managed type. And what happens is at that point, as a JavaScript developer, you can sit there and make calls against what looks like a JavaScript, in this case, a JavaScript array. And our JavaScript proxy will realize that and actually pipe the calls automatically down into the managed type. Now, in this specific method call, though, all I'm doing is I'm saying, well, great, I've gotten my list of car. Please go throw it over the wall into the managed world. However, you will see an example of that JavaScript proxy in action when we pull the data back out of the isolated store. So this is the companion method in the example. I'm going out now and I'm saying, hey, go get me that list of car that you have in isolated storage, and please get it back out and give it to me in JavaScript. So what's happening here? This is actually returning a managed list by reference back out to JavaScript. And the cool thing is the JavaScript code has no clue it's talking to a managed type. So if we take a look at what I'm doing with this cars variable and scroll down a little bit, here's the cars variable. I'm iterating over it just as if it were an array. But when I'm calling like length, for example, that's actually being proxied back into the Silverlight app domain and saying, oh, hey, list of T, tell me, what's your length? And then you can see here, I'm indexing into the car by ordinal. And then when I pull out each entry in that list, it's actually looking like a JavaScript object. So I'm reading out the model property. I'm reading out the make property. I'm able to actually read out the year property, in this case as a date time. So all this code right here inside of this render cars method, it all looks like JavaScript. I mean, that's what it is. But underneath the hood, all that code is running against a JavaScript proxy, and we're turning around and piping all the calls automatically back into the Silverlight application. So let's also take a quick look at the code itself that's backing that. So we'll take a look at store cars and load cars. Actually, once I find my scriptable type here. Okay, so we talked about the store cars method. This is the managed side of that call, right? Once again, marked as scriptable, as a scriptable member. Looks like normal managed code, very complex type. And so this is actually a pretty big stride forward in Silverlight 2 compared to last year's alpha, right? In last year's alpha, you were basically restricted to like string. I think we had a bug where Boolean didn't even work right, and like date time. But now it's, primitive types, lists, dictionaries, arbitrary custom types. You can put all of those into your return values, into your input parameters of scriptable methods, and you can go out and use that to talk to JavaScript. So in my case here, what I'm doing for the storage, I'm also making use of isolated storage. You've seen it used in a few different places in various talks. In my case, what I wanted to highlight is, even though the isolated storage API from last year's alpha, it's still here, it also is admittedly complex. Right? If you use the low-level ISOstore API in Silverlight 2 today, there's streams, files, directories, a couple of somewhat oddly named types. It's actually pretty powerful if you want to build a very complex directory structure. But if you're like me, and you come from like session state and application storage in ASP.NET, all I want to do is like, here's some data, can you just stuff it somewhere and give it back to me, right? I don't want to deal with all the other hassles. So what I'm using is this facade we have called application settings. And what you do is you always say, give me the default application settings object. And what it is just a dictionary that sits on top of isolated storage. And what's great is you just code against it just like you do any other dictionary. So here, I'm taking that list and I'm sticking it into the dictionary. And then vice versa for the load call, I'm just getting it right back out of the dictionary. It's just the exact same code you'd write today against a dictionary. Another thing to remember is when you are manipulating the ISO store and manage code, you got to remember to save what you did back to disk, because when you're actually manipulating that dictionary, it's sitting in memory. And of course, usually the reason why you use ISO store or application settings is you want to come back later and actually like have the data still there. So remember to call save. And then the somewhat lengthy line of code up here, again, this is just an example of sort of good coding technique, good defensive coding, which is isolated storage has a quota. In terms of application settings, when you're using that API, it's 100 kilobytes. We basically, at least for now in beta 1, pick the same defaults that the shared objects feature in Flash has. And so what you probably want to do is you want to be defensive and write this line of code that checks for available free space. Because if you don't make the check and actually make sure, okay, I actually have enough space, I mean, in this case, I probably only needed like 1K, but pick a number that makes sense. What's going to end up happening is when you try to save your application settings, you're going to get a big fat exception saying, oops, sorry, you're out of space, I can't do that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up to talk to you folks about today is if we take a look at the way I put the Silverlight control on this page right here, I'm actually using it in what's called a headless manner. What I mean by that is let's scroll off to the side. You see the width and the height? It's 0 pixels wide and 0 pixels high, which means this application, when I run it, it doesn't take up any visual space on the page. Well, that's an important point because as a result of the fact that it's not going to have any XAML UI, that means that when you use isolated storage and if you run into the size limit, you're not going to be able to ask the user to try to increase the quota. So there is functionality in the isolated storage API to pop up a little box and ask the current interactive user and say, hey, like Flickr.com's asking for more space. Do you want to allow it? But there's a very important caveat that comes with that. You can only get that dialog to pop up if it happened in response to an interactive user interface event from XAML. So what you can't do is you can't, from a background thread, pop up a quota dialog. And what you can't do is when you're doing something like this with a headless UI, where there's no XAML, you can't have like an HTML click event or a mouse move event over the HTML surface. You can't have that be the user interface event that triggers the request for more isolated storage. So that's why it's doubly important if you're running if you're not running with XAML UI, to always make sure that you check for available free space, because like in this scenario, in this example, you're not going to be able to pop the dialog and ask the user for more quota. So with that all said, let's go ahead and pull it up again in Firefox. Again, very simple. If I go ahead right now and say load, you'll notice there's nothing actually happening. So let's go out and store some data. So now basically I've got that array of JavaScript objects stored off. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL off, pull up IE, pop that in, pull it up over here. And you notice what happened. I went out and I stored the data in isolated storage in an instance of Firefox. I was able to successfully read it back out in Internet Explorer. So the message there on both Windows and on Mac, everything pipes down to the same physical location on disk. It's inside of the user's specific directory. So you can go out and you can store stuff in Firefox, pull it up in Safari, you can store it in IE, you can get back to it in Firefox. So the store is separate and apart from, for example, the browser-specific caches and things like that. Okay, and so in the time remaining, I've got one more example, a little bit more advanced, of doing something sort of funky with the scriptable feature. So once again, we're using Flickr, and just to give credit where credit's due, Chung is once again the guy who put together the XAML UI that you're going to see. I completely admit I am not a designer. I'm not very good with using XAML. So Chung put this together visually, and what it is a little browser that lets you reach out onto Flickr, do a search, and pull back a bunch of images, and then scroll back and forth through those images. So, I don't know, let's go look for fire trucks. See what comes back from Flickr. get a couple of images, get everything populated up here. And, great, we can sit here and scroll back and forth. So, okay, that's very nice. What am I going to do with that? Well, what I want to be able to do is actually hook up the forward back button that's in the browser and actually wire it into that XAML application. And the way I'm going to do that is with the functionality that's inside of the HTML bridge. So the first thing I'm going to do is, actually I'll pull up the ASPX page just so you can see what we're going to try to do. Inside of AJAX, I've already gone out and created a script reference to this JavaScript file, historymanager.js. So this is just some sample code, and when we get the sample code posted, it's available for you, so you can go out and run it. And I just want to clarify, it's a sample basically we put together for this demo. For those of you who've been avidly watching what's going on with ASP.NET AJAX, you know that the history functionality has now actually been baked into Script Manager. And so in the coming months, we'll actually rev this kind of sample so it fully integrates. But for now, this is all standalone. So we've got a little standalone history manager. And inside of ASP.NET's page load event, we wire it up. So we got the history manager, and we also have a hidden iframe. Right? That's the familiar old trick for getting the older versions of IE to have a way to sort of stuff something into the URL and say, oh, you navigated forward. And so you basically store that in the URL of the iframe. And then what happens is when the Silverlight application is up and running, I'm actually calling into a scriptable entry point. In this case, I called it signal. And notice what I'm doing. I'm saying, you know something? I want to pass an instance of an ASP.NET AJAX control right here, and I want to pass it into manage code. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here's my set history manager method, and I'll drop in the magic that's going to get that wired up properly. Go ahead and paste that in. And you'll see that inside of the history manager that what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, given this reference to the history manager, I'm actually going to go out and invoke a method against it, and the method is going to be called addNavigated. So if I were to look in the JavaScript for my AJAX control, there's actually a method there called addNavigated. And what's pretty funky is when I invoke that method, look at what I'm passing as a parameter. I'm actually passing a manage function delegate back out into JavaScript. And I'm basically telling the AJAX control, when it comes time for that AJAX control to raise the navigated event, it should actually go out and fire it against this manage method. And so if I go over to that method, in this case, I actually have to go out and define my page P. And let's see here. So this should actually be the root visual. So we'll go out and do that. So we'll say this.root visual as page. And that should give me that. So let's go ahead and navigate over to the forward back button navigated. So you can see here, this is actually the manage method, the signature, that's going to be called by the AJAX control. And look at what it's getting. It's getting 2 instances of a script object. And so again, remember, think about it if you're a JavaScript developer. Today, an ASP.NET AJAX control, if it raises an event, it gives you a reference to the AJAX control in the sender, and it gives you a reference to whatever makes sense for event arguments. And so in this case, these event arguments are actually a little JavaScript type that happens to support a method called getEntryName. So when that AJAX control detects that someone's clicked forward or backwards in the browser, it's going to go out and invoke this getEntryName method so I can pull off of the little hash value on the URL the specific image index that I was on. And how did the image index actually get there in the first place? Well, that's the one last piece of code I'm going to wire up here. And so you'll see here I've got this addHistoryEntry method. So for example, when the XAML next button is clicked, I call addHistoryEntry, and what it does is it takes that history manager instance and it says, hey, by the way, I want to call the addEntry method on you, and here's the piece of history information to go store, which in this case is the image index. So go out and save it, go out and rebuild the solution, let that chug on through, and then I will flip us over to hopefully the Mac. Okay, so the Mac is up. Got the Mac up there. All right, excellente. We'll pull up, let's see, what do we got? We got Safari here, so we'll pull that up. And I've already got the link set up to the Flickr image browser. So we'll pull up our new version of the Flickr image browser. And once again, let's go look for fire trucks, go do a quickie search, let that chug through, get some images in. And now this time around, what I'm clicking through and navigating, if you watch that address bar, you'll see the image index showing up. That's that add history entry from the Silverlight application. And now if I move my mouse cursor up here, now I'm actually navigating the internal state of my XAML control totally off of the forward back button that's built into the browser. And the way I'm able to do that is with the power of the HTML bridge that's in Silverlight 2. So that's pretty much the extent of the code demos. I hope you've gotten a pretty good idea of the power of the media control, the Silverlight control, and also sort of at least a glimpse of all the functionality that's in the HTML bridge. If you have any questions, Chung and I will be here for a few minutes, and then we'll also drift on down to the open spaces. So thanks for showing up, folks.